It all began one chilly autumn evening. I had gone over to my friend Mark's house, a cozy bungalow nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. We were sitting in his backyard, sipping on hot cocoa and relishing the cool breeze, when suddenly, something strange caught my eye. Mark's backyard was expansive, filled with lush, well-tended greenery. We often spent evenings there, enjoying the tranquility it offered. But that evening, it felt different. The air grew heavy, and a peculiar unease washed over us as the sun dipped below the horizon. Mark's dog, Max, usually an enthusiastic and friendly golden retriever, stood at the edge of the yard, growling menacingly at the dense woods that bordered their property. His usually wagging tail was rigid, and his fur bristled. It was as if he had sensed something sinister lurking in those trees. I asked Mark if he'd noticed Max's unusual behavior, but he merely shrugged it off, dismissing it as an overactive imagination. I tried to shake off the feeling, focusing on our conversation, but the unease persisted. The once familiar backdrop of trees and bushes seemed alien, and shadows danced in the corners of my vision. It wasn't until Mark suggested we head inside that I noticed something even stranger. The temperature had plummeted. It felt like we had stepped into a walk-in freezer. My breath formed frosty clouds in the air, and I shivered despite my thick sweater. Mark was visibly unnerved now, and his voice quivered as he hurriedly ushered me inside. As we entered the warmth of his house, the inexplicable chill seemed to dissipate, but the memory of that peculiar evening remained etched in my mind. I couldn't help but obsess over the strange occurrences that had transpired in Mark's backyard. It had been a week since that eerie evening, and Mark hadn't mentioned a word about it. We were best friends, sharing our most intimate secrets, yet he remained tight-lipped about the unsettling events. It was a mystery I couldn't ignore. One day, I finally mustered up the courage to broach the subject. We were hanging out in his living room, playing video games, but the memories of that evening were still fresh in my mind. I hesitated for a moment, then finally blurted out, "Mark, what do you think happened in your backyard last week?" He stopped mid-game, his expression instantly darkening. The jovial atmosphere turned tense. "I don't want to talk about it," he muttered, his gaze avoiding mine. I pressed on, my curiosity getting the better of me. "But, Mark, it was so strange. Max, the cold, we can't just ignore it. Don't you want to find out what happened?" His eyes bore into mine, filled with a mix of fear and hesitation. "I've already told you, don't bring it up again. Some things are better left alone. Trust me." Mark's reaction left me bewildered. He had always been open and transparent with me, but this time, he was evading my questions as if he were hiding something sinister. It was clear that he knew more than he was letting on, and that only fueled my determination to uncover the truth. The days passed in a blur, but I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had gripped me ever since that peculiar evening at Mark's house. I was compelled to investigate further, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a growing fear that I couldn't escape. Then, it happened. One evening, as I sat in my own cozy living room, watching television and sipping on a cup of tea, I felt an unmistakable drop in temperature. The air grew frigid, just as it had in Mark's backyard. Panic set in, and I was transported back to that eerie night. I glanced around, searching for any sign of what might be causing this strange phenomenon. My cat, Whiskers, was huddled in the corner, her fur bristling, and her eyes fixed on the wall. She hissed and arched her back as if she saw something that I couldn't. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it, a dark, shadowy figure that seemed to be looming on the edge of my vision. Terror coursed through me as I watched the shape slowly materialize. It was a figure, indistinct yet undeniably human-like, and it appeared to be moving closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Just as I was about to bolt from the room, the temperature returned to normal, and the shadowy figure dissipated, leaving me in a state of shock and confusion. I couldn't believe what I had witnessed in my own home. The next day, I couldn't keep the experience to myself any longer. I knew I had to confide in Mark, even if he had warned me not to discuss it with anyone. I called him, my voice trembling, and told him about the chilling encounter in my living room. Mark's response was immediate. He came over to my house, his face grave and his eyes filled with a mix of fear and understanding. We sat down, and he finally began to share his own experiences. "I've seen it too, in my house," he confessed. "It started a few months ago, and I didn't want to burden you with it. But it's been getting worse. I've even consulted a paranormal expert, and they couldn't explain it. They said it's something ancient and malevolent." We were both left with more questions than answers. The inexplicable occurrences in our homes had shaken our sense of reality. It was clear that the strange happenings were not confined to Mark's backyard or my living room, and the unspoken fear of the unknown weighed heavily upon us. As we sat there, trying to make sense of it all, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The paranormal forces that had intruded into our lives were no longer a mere curiosity, they were a menacing presence that we could not escape. We were drawn into a world of darkness, one that defied explanation and left us with an unsettling sense of foreboding. Our lives were now intertwined with the inexplicable, and our quest for answers had just begun. Mark and I were left in a state of confusion and unease after sharing our strange experiences. The rational part of our minds desperately sought plausible explanations, while the lingering fear gnawed at our sense of security. We decided to embark on a mission to unravel the mysteries surrounding our eerie encounters. Our first step was to rule out any natural factors that could have contributed to the chilling temperature drops. We inspected our respective homes for drafts, faulty insulation, or any other plausible reasons that could explain the unexplained drops in temperature. We found nothing that could account for the phenomena. Our next avenue of investigation was to reach out to experts in various fields. Mark made contact with a local meteorologist to inquire about any weather anomalies in the area that might have caused these sudden cold fronts. I, on the other hand, called an electrician to inspect my home's heating system and wiring for any irregularities that could have resulted in the temperature fluctuations. Both experts reported that there were no scientific explanations for the sudden temperature drops. As the weeks passed, we shared our findings, but the more we delved into it, the more perplexing the situation became. Our initial attempts to find rational explanations for the strange events continued to fall short. In our conversations, it became increasingly evident that we were not dealing with mere coincidences or conventional explanations. Mark and I were growing more desperate to make sense of the eerie occurrences that seemed to have taken over our lives. As we explored various avenues for answers, we couldn't help but delve into the history of our respective homes and the land they were built on. I began to dig through old records, searching for any historical data related to my home. I found that my house had been built in the 1950s, on land that was once part of a larger forested area. There were no records of any significant events or tragedies associated with the property, and it appeared to have a relatively uneventful history. Mark's search into the history of his home also yielded minimal results. His house was slightly older, dating back to the early 1940s, and the land was originally part of a larger estate that had been divided over the years. There was no indication of any noteworthy incidents or disturbances linked to the property. Despite our research, we couldn't find any historical or environmental factors that could explain the strange events we had witnessed. The lack of tangible information left us feeling even more unsettled and perplexed. Feeling increasingly isolated by our strange experiences, Mark and I decided to reach out to others who might have encountered similar phenomena. We attended local community meetings, seeking advice from longtime residents in our neighborhood, and shared our story with them. Some of the residents were initially skeptical, attributing our experiences to overactive imaginations or the product of stress. However, as we persisted in sharing our detailed accounts and genuine concern, we began to uncover whispers of similar incidents that had occurred in the past. People spoke of inexplicable cold spots, strange shadows, and even eerie sounds in their homes. Though these stories were anecdotal and often unverified, they resonated with our own experiences. One particular elderly resident, Mrs. Withers, shared a chilling story from her youth about unexplained phenomena in the same wooded area that bordered Mark's property. She described ghostly sightings and inexplicable temperature changes, dating back to the 1940s. Her account sent shivers down our spines, as it seemed to corroborate our own experiences. With a growing network of support, we decided to seek the guidance of a local historian who specialized in the history of our neighborhood. Perhaps, he could help us unravel the mysteries that seemed to be hidden in the shadows of our seemingly ordinary homes. As we prepared to meet with the historian, Mark and I couldn't help but hope that our efforts would bring us closer to understanding the unsettling events that had unfolded in our lives. It was a journey that had started as a quest for rational explanations but had quickly evolved into a hunt for something deeper and more mysterious than we had ever imagined.